Welcome to Last Records. Today we're looking at entitled Karens who found the absolute dumbest ways to get themselves permanently erased.
From a woman who marched into a running car wash to prove a point, to another who fired a nail gun into her own chest to win an argument, ending it all in the dumbest way possible. It was March 11th, 2019, outside Sacramento, California. A bright weekday morning sat over a busy strip mall corner, the entrance to an automated tunnel car wash marked off with bright cones and a painted lane, an attendant in a vest waving the next car forward. Genevieve Stallings was 53, and the kind of customer everyone at that car wash had learned to dread. The woman who came through nearly every week, convinced the machine was cheating her out of a proper clean. She had a habit of refusing to pay full price for anything she could find a flaw in, planting herself at the counter to argue over a single streak or water spot until an employee gave in just to make her leave. That morning, she rolled out of the end of the tunnel, looked over her hood, and decided the brushes had barely touched the car, the perfect excuse to demand the entire wash for free and refuse to pay a single cent. Personally, I would have just driven off and left a 1-star review like a normal person, but for her, that was never going to be anywhere near enough. When the staff refused to simply hand her the wash for free, Genevieve decided she would gather the proof herself, and she walked back toward the tunnel on foot while another car was already being pulled through it.
And honestly, from the footage the attendant showed investigators, she walked right into the running tunnel with her phone out, filming the brushes to prove that they'd barely touched her car.
An automated tunnel runs on a conveyor, and a bank of heavy spinning brushes on a timer. Machinery that has no way to sense a person and no reason to stop, and a fistful of loose hair or a coat is all it takes for those brushes to catch and pull. By the account the attendant and 2 waiting customers gave, Genevieve ignored every shout to get out and pushed deep into the tunnel alongside the moving car, scrubbing at a spot with her sleeve and holding her phone up to the rotating brushes. As she leaned in close to film one of the big vertical brushes, the drum caught the loose fabric of her coat and a fistful of her hair at the same instant, and it wound her in toward itself far faster than she could ever pull back. There was no operator standing over a switch to stop it in time, and the brush dragged her off her feet and into the machinery before anyone could reach the panel. The waiting customers and the attendant were already running and shouting for it to stop, but a tunnel like that is built to keep moving, and it carried her in among the brushes and rollers in the time it takes to call out a warning.
What I keep stumbling over is that a clean car was never really the point. She just couldn't stand the thought of paying full price and being told that she was wrong.
There is something about walking into live machinery to win an argument over a car wash that I do not think I will ever quite make sense of. The crew slammed the emergency stop and worked to free her, but the brush mechanism had wound her in with the same blunt, relentless force it used on a car, and the injuries to her head and chest were not survivable. Paramedics reached her within minutes, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the death multiple blunt force injuries and asphyxia from being caught in the wash machinery. And after all of that, I would honestly put money on her car still rolling out with the exact streaks she had been complaining about. The car wash was found to have done everything right, with clear signage, a working emergency stop, and an attendant who repeatedly warned her away from the tunnel, and no charges were filed against the staff. The footage from the wash cameras matched every witness account on the lot, and the case was closed as an accidental death caused by a woman who walked into running machinery to chase a refund. That one walked into a machine to prove a point about a car wash. This next woman took her stand at a return counter, where being told no about a refund pushed her to pick up the very thing she was returning and prove it still worked. It was September 3rd, 2018, and a slow afternoon hung over a big box home improvement store on the edge of a Midwest suburb. The returns desk near the front lined with power tools and boxed hardware waiting to go back on the shelves. Carla Renee Brumfield was 52 and a fixture at that returns desk, known to every clerk who had ever worked a shift there. The customer who treated a denied refund like a personal war. She carried a thick binder everywhere she shopped, stuffed with old receipts and printed policies and screenshots, and she would slap it down on the counter like a court exhibit the moment anyone told her no. That afternoon, she was returning a framing nail gun she swore was defective, demanding full cash back with no receipt, and when the young clerk calmly explained the tool would need to be inspected first, she took the no as a public humiliation in front of the whole line. Getting told no at a counter stings, I do get that, but the leap from there to picking up a nail gun is one I genuinely cannot even begin to comprehend. To prove the clerk wrong and humiliate her in front of the line, Carla announced that the nail gun worked perfectly and that she would show the entire store right then and there.
Based on my research, the clerk and two customers told investigators that Carla loaded the framing nailer right at the counter, waving off every plea to put it down so that she could fire it.
A framing nailer is not a toy or a noisemaker. It is a tool built to drive long nails clean through solid lumber with a single pull. These guns have a safety tip meant to be pressed to a surface before they fire, but that contact safety presses just as easily against a body as against a board, and at point-blank range, a framing nail carries more than enough force to pass through bone and reach whatever lies behind it. By the account of the clerk and the customers in line, Carla pressed the nailer flat to her own chest to show how harmless she was sure it was, still arguing that a working tool proved her whole case. With one hand, she forced the contact safety against her body, and with the other, she pulled the trigger, and the gun drove a long framing nail deep into her chest in a single instant. For a moment, she only looked down at the tool, almost surprised, as though it had betrayed her rather than done exactly what it was built to do. Even then, swaying against the counter and going pale, she was still telling the clerk she was going to sue, that the store would be hearing from her lawyer, the threat fading as her strength left her. The clerk had frozen with the phone still half raised, and the line of customers stood in stunned silence as a routine afternoon at the returns desk became something none of them would ever forget. Spending your last clear moments threatening a lawsuit is the kind of stubbornness I honestly do not think I have ever come across before. The clerk called for help at once, and a customer eased her down to the floor, but the nail had driven too deep into the heart itself, and a wound like that leaves almost no time at all. Paramedics arrived within minutes and could do nothing, and she was pronounced dead a short time later. The medical examiner ruled the death a penetrating injury to the heart from a nail fired at point-blank range, accidental in manner. She hauled in a whole binder to prove her case, and the only thing she ever really managed to prove was that the tool worked perfectly. The store was cleared of any fault, having told her the tool needed inspection and having pleaded with her to put it down, and the staff were noted for trying to stop her right up to the end. The case was closed as an accidental discharge, caused entirely by a woman who fired a nail gun into her own chest to win an argument over a refund. That one fired the very tool she was returning to prove a point. This next woman could not stand being told she was wrong, and a pointless argument inside a cafe ended in the worst way imaginable. It was June 19th, 2017, and a warm lunch rush filled a small independent cafe in a college town in the Pacific Northwest. The kind of place with a chalkboard menu, a handful of tables, and 2 people working the whole floor. Cherie Bellwether was 47 and known at half the businesses in town. For one thing, a temper that could turn the smallest complaint into a screaming match she simply had to win. She filmed nearly everything for a modest online following, narrating her complaints to the camera in the middle of a shop, certain that having an audience made her the authority on whatever fight she had picked that day. That afternoon, she had worked herself into a fury over the cafe's oversized signature pastry, loudly insisting it was smaller than advertised and refusing to back down an inch when the staff calmly told her she was simply wrong. I have walked away from plenty of arguments I was losing, and I have never once regretted choosing to breathe over getting the last word. She demanded a refund and a free replacement, and when the staff calmly held their ground, she got louder and redder until, unwilling to lose in front of a full room, she announced she would prove how small the pastry was by cramming the entire thing into her mouth in one bite. Apparently, several customers told investigators that Cherie crammed the whole oversized pastry into her mouth at once, glaring at the staff and filming herself, set on showing her followers that it was barely a mouthful. It was a dense, heavy pastry the size of a small plate, far too much to chew or swallow in one go, and she forced it in anyway to make her point. The airway sits directly behind the mouth, and a single mass of food too large to chew can seal it off completely, cutting off air in a way that no amount of being right about a portion size can ever undo. By the account of the workers and the customers watching, the performance turned in seconds. The packed mass of pastry lodged in the back of her throat the moment she tried to speak through it, and she could neither swallow it down nor cough it back up. Her eyes went wide, and her hands flew to her throat, the phone clattering to the floor, and the same room she had been lecturing understood at once that she was choking. A worker rushed around the counter to help her, while a customer trained in first aid started in on abdominal thrusts as fast as they could. The whole room that had been a captive audience to her complaint only a moment earlier turned at once into people frantically working to save her, chairs scraping back, someone already on the phone begging an operator to hurry.
From what I gathered, people there did everything right and tried for minutes to clear it, which only makes it worse that it was packed in so far tight and deep to be able to shift it in time.
She was so deep into the fight that she could not even stop to take a breath, and I find that genuinely hard to wrap my head around. The thrusts could not move the dense plug of pastry, and without air, Cherie lost consciousness on the cafe floor within a couple of minutes. The staff had called for help the instant she began to choke, and paramedics arrived quickly, but by the time they finally cleared her airway, too much time had passed. She was pronounced dead a short time later. The medical examiner ruled the death asphyxiation from an airway obstruction. It still amazes me that she choked to death over an argument the rest of the room had already let go of. The cafe was fully cleared, its staff having tried to talk her out of it and then fought to save her, and the bystander video that surfaced online showed everyone in the room doing their best for a woman who had created the danger herself. The two workers were praised for keeping their heads, and the small business kept the town firmly on its side. The death was ruled an accidental asphyxiation, caused by a stunt she chose to pull to win an argument. That one choked on a point she was determined to prove. This next woman could not leave anyone else's property alone, and her need to enforce a rule herself put her hands on something she never should have touched. It was October 8th, 2016, in a tidy, planned community outside Phoenix, Arizona. A dry, still evening had settled over rows of nearly identical houses, the kind of neighborhood where the lawns were measured and the mailboxes all matched by order of the board. Maureen Ostrowski was 58 and the president of that homeowners association, and she ran the place less like a volunteer and more like a woman who believed the streets belonged to her. She carried a tape measure and a labeled notebook on her evening walks, logging every trash can left out too long and every shrub an inch too tall, a cigarette always going out of a 30-year habit, photographing her neighbors' yards like she was building a case against each of them. Her latest fixation was a neighbor's new propane patio heater, and the tank and line that fed it, which she had decided on her own, was installed against the rules, and she had papered the household with citations and warning letters over it for weeks, refusing to let it go even after she was told it was fine. I have tangled with an HOA or two in my time, and they usually stop at a snippy letter, so how far this one was willing to go is genuinely hard for me to picture. The propane company had already come out once at the neighbor's request, confirmed the installation was fine, and told Maureen directly to stop touching equipment that was not hers. So investigators established that Maureen had been warned more than once by the neighbor and by the propane company to keep away from the tank, and that she went to document the violation herself after dark.
That evening, she crouched at the side of the house with her phone and her notebook, working at the fitting on the tank's regulator to get the photograph she wanted of it coming loose.
Propane is heavier than the air around it, and in the still night air against the side of a house, it sinks and pools low to the ground. It is given a sharp smell on purpose so that leaks get noticed, but a person knelt down in it and fixed on a task can stop registering that smell within minutes as the nose simply tires of it and stops sounding the alarm. By the reconstruction investigators pieced together, Maureen loosened a fitting enough to start a slow leak she did not understand the danger of, crouched right in the middle of it in the dead air beside the wall. She stayed crouched there several minutes, working at the fitting and lining up her photographs as the propane built up unseen around her in the dead air of the narrow space between the house and the fence. There was no breeze to carry it off and nowhere for it to go, so it sank and pooled where she knelt. Then, still crouched there in the dark over the fitting, she did the thing she did without thinking a dozen times a day and lifted a lighter to a fresh cigarette, and the small open flame in that pocket of pooled propane was all it ever needed. Actual professionals told her more than once to just walk away, and I still cannot believe she treated even that as a fight she had to win. The flash of ignition was heard down the block, and neighbors who had spent months on the receiving end of her citations were the ones who called for help and tried to reach her. The propane company confirmed the leak came from the fitting she had been warned to leave alone, and that the ignition source was right there in her own hand. She did not survive the burns, and the medical examiner ruled the death the result of an accidental propane ignition. After years of her policing every blade of grass on that street, the way this one ended feels almost too on the nose for me to even add to. The homeowners association came apart in the fallout, with neighbors going public about years of harassment, and the board was dissolved within the year. Neighbors who had spent years on the receiving end of her measuring tape and her citations spoke openly afterward about what living under her board had been like, and the utility records and her own notebook full of violations made it clear she had been repeatedly warned to stay away from the tank. The death was ruled an accidental propane ignition, caused by her own tampering. That one could not keep her hands off a neighbor's property. This next woman could not let go of a parking space, and she was so busy filming her own victory that she forgot where she was standing. It was August 14th, 2019, and a hot Saturday filled a multi-level parking structure beside a shopping center in suburban Texas. Tires squealing on the painted concrete, every level fuller than the last, as the afternoon crowd circled for spaces. Donnell Tackett was 51 and treated a parking lot like a battlefield she was born to win. The woman who would block a lane for 10 minutes rather than let someone else have a spot she had decided was hers. She filmed everything in these standoffs, narrating into her phone for an audience, certain that the footage would always prove she was the reasonable one and the other driver was the villain. That afternoon, she had claimed an open space on an upper level by planting herself in the middle of it. And when another driver, who had been patiently waiting with a turn signal on, edged forward, she exploded, absolutely sure that the whole structure was watching and squarely on her side. It was the kind of fight she had picked 100 times before and always believed she won. Parking turns all of us a little feral now and then. I will own that. But most people cool off after a few seconds, and she just never seemed to get there. She stepped out into the open near the edge of the upper level, phone up, filming the other driver, and a triumphant speech about standing her ground.
Apparently, witnesses later told investigators that Donnell kept backing up as she filmed and gestured, drifting toward the low perimeter wall at the open side without once looking behind her.
The other driver and a bystander both called out and pointed, trying to warn her how close she was getting to the edge. The perimeter walls on older parking structures sit low by design, meant to stop a slow-rolling car, not to catch a grown adult who backs into them at full height and keeps going. By the account of the two witnesses who saw it, Donnell took their shouting as part of the argument and waved them off without turning around, still talking into the camera. She took one more step back to make her point, and the backs of her legs met the low wall at exactly the wrong height, just below her center of balance. Her own backward momentum folded her over it before she could register what had stopped her. For a second, she seemed to catch herself on the top of the wall, arms going out, the phone still in one hand, and the people watching thought she had it. Then, her weight carried through, and she went over the open side of the structure. By the end, they were not fighting her anymore. They were trying to save her life, and I cannot get over the fact that she could not tell the two apart. She fell several stories to the pavement below, and the injuries were not survivable, with paramedics arriving within minutes to find she had died on impact. The structure met the building code for its age, and her own phone, recovered still recording, captured the warnings the bystanders shouted in the seconds before she went over. The medical examiner ruled the death multiple blunt force injuries from the fall, accidental in manner. She always believed the camera would make her the hero of these standoffs, and it kills me that the only thing it ever caught was her ignoring the people trying to help. The footage became one more clip in the grim genre of people too busy filming to notice the danger in front of them, though most who saw it did not know how it ended. The driver she had been screaming at and the bystander who tried to warn her were both cleared of any fault, having done nothing but ask her to be careful, and no one else was found responsible in any way. The case was closed as an accidental death, one more in a long line of people who could not look up from a screen in time. That one backed away from safety while staring at a screen. This next woman went to war with a teenager's flying toy, and she decided to bring it down with her own two hands. It was July 7th, 2018, and a humid evening settled over a quiet cul-de-sac in suburban Florida, sprinklers ticking across the lawns, a backyard pool glowing blue in the dusk behind a screen enclosure at the end of the street. Rosalind Hartzog was 55 and had spent the better part of a year at war with the teenager 2 doors down, and his hobby drone, convinced the small camera was spying on her every time it lifted off. She kept a written log of every single sighting, the date and the time and the direction it flew, the same way some people keep a diary, except hers was a case file she was building against a 15-year-old. She had called the police more than once, filed complaints with the city, and screamed across the fence about her privacy until the neighbors dreaded the sight of her. And none of it had given her the one thing she actually wanted: the satisfaction of making the drone and the boy who flew it simply disappear. I would not love a stranger's drone buzzing over my yard either, I will give her that, but there is a huge gap between filing a complaint and doing what she did that evening. When the drone rose over the street that evening, Rosalind grabbed a long metal pool skimmer and went out to bring it down herself, swinging at it over and over as the teenager tried to fly it back toward his own yard.
From the boy's own drone footage that investigators later reviewed, Rosalind knocked the drone down onto the pad beside her own pool equipment on the third or fourth swing, then went after it on foot.
On the third or fourth swing, then went after it on foot. She crossed the wet pool decking in bare feet to stomp the drone where it had fallen against the metal housing of her pool pump and light system. A pool and its equipment have to be electrically bonded and grounded for a reason. And when that system is faulty, a person standing in water around it can become the easiest path the current finds to the ground. By the reconstruction investigators later put together, the faulty wiring Rosalind had been told for over a year to repair had been quietly energizing the metal housing of the pump and light system the whole time it ran. She stepped onto the wet pad in bare feet, water from the decking pooled all around her, and reached down for the drone where it had wedged right against that metal housing. As she grabbed for it, her bare hand closed directly onto the energized metal, and in that instant her body became the path the current had been waiting for. In through her hand, down through her soaked bare feet, and into the wet ground beneath her. Her muscles clamped tight the way they do under that kind of current, so that she could not unlock her grip on the metal, could not pull her hand back, could not step away or even call out. The teenager, still up the street with his controller, saw her go rigid and drop.
She'd been warned this exact thing was a hazard and called it fear-mongering. And to me, the cruel twist is that the danger was never the drone at all. It was the corner that she'd cut in her own backyard.
She spent the entire evening treating a teenager's toy like a real threat, and I cannot get past how completely she had the actual danger backwards. The teenager, still outside, saw her go down and ran for his parents, who called for help and shut off power to the house. Service records showed Rosalind had been advised more than once that year to repair the pool's bonding and lighting, and that she declined the work each time as an unnecessary expense. By the time the power was cut, it was far too late, and the medical examiner ruled the death accidental electrocution. In the end, it was the boy she had branded a menace who ran up the street screaming for help, and I find something deeply backwards about that being how it played out. The teenager and his family faced no fault, and the drone footage that Rosalind had spent a year treating as a violation of her privacy became the record that explained exactly how she died. The pool fault was confirmed against the service history that showed her turning down the repair again and again, and the teenager who had been the target of a year of complaints was the one whose footage finally explained what had happened. The case was closed as an accidental electrocution caused by a hazard she had been warned about and chose to ignore. That one cut a corner in her own yard and paid for it. Our last woman paid full price for a luxury escape, and she decided the rules that came with it were meant for everyone but her. It was April 2nd, 2020, and a cold, bright morning lay over a hot spring resort high in the mountains of the American West. Steam rising off a string of soaking pools, the highest of them roped off behind warning signs at the edge of the bare volcanic rock. Bridget Vanderkamp was 49 and made her living as a luxury travel blogger, the kind of guest who treated every resort she visited as something that existed to serve and impress her. She narrated her whole trip into her phone for her followers. The suite, the meals, the staff, turning every small inconvenience into a performance about the service she felt she was owed for what she had paid. The resort kept its guest pools at a safe, pleasant temperature, but the source spring higher up the slope ran far hotter and was fenced off. And to Bridget, those barriers were just there for ordinary tourists, not for a paying guest like her. I love a good vacation photo as much as the next person, but the idea that a safety sign does not apply to you because of your room rate is a kind of logic I just cannot follow. She had already complained that the safe pools looked too crowded and ordinary for the content she wanted, and a staff member had told her plainly that the upper spring was dangerous and off limits.
So I read that the other guests supposedly told investigators that an employee warned Bridget directly that the source pool was hot enough to cause serious injury, and that she filmed herself stepping over the rope anyway.
She picked her way up the rock to the edge of the steaming source pool, holding her phone out for the shot, and went to lower herself in for the photograph she had decided she was owed. The water at the source of a spring like that can run far past the temperature of a hot drink, hot enough that even a moment of full contact causes severe burns, and the shock alone can make it impossible to climb back out. By the account of the guests who saw it from below, the moment Bridget put her weight in, she lost her footing on the slick mineral edge and went in past her waist. The heat was immediate and overwhelming, and the shock of it took her strength and her balance at once. so that instead of pulling herself out, she struggled and slipped further in. The phone she had been holding out for the shot went into the water with her, and the few seconds she might have used to climb out were lost to the shock of the heat and the slick mineral lip giving her nothing to grip. The guests below were already on their feet and shouting for the staff. She stepped over that barrier to show she was above the rules, and the cruel thing for me is that no photo on Earth was ever going to be worth what waded past that rope. Staff trained for exactly this, reached her as fast as they safely could, and got her out. But the burns from the source water were catastrophic, and beyond what anyone at the scene could treat. The resort was found to have had clear signage, barriers, and a staff member who warned her directly, and investigators determined she had crossed a marked danger line on her own. She did not survive her injuries, and the medical examiner ruled the death the result of thermal burns, accidental in manner. Years of her demanding the very best of everything, and there is something I find almost unbearable about her final recording being the one rule she should have thanked someone for. The footage from her own phone, recovered from the water, showed the warnings she had been given and the rope she had stepped over, and the resort and its staff were cleared of any fault. The staff who had warned her and then risked the heat to pull her out were cleared completely, and the resort rebuilt the barriers around the source pool, taller and harder to step over in the months that followed. The case was closed as an accidental death by thermal burns, the result of a guest who decided a danger line was beneath her.